Hey guys, Mr. McDonald here. Today we need to talk about the laws that Gregor Mendel is able to create after observing his pea plant experiments. Say that 10 times fast. All right, so let me make the screen bigger here for us. All right, so again, these came from Mendel actually doing years of experiments on thousands and thousands of different pea plants. And he was able to come up with these generalizations that he saw throughout all of those different things. And he kind of laid the groundwork for us in genetics with some very important basic concepts that we might take for granted today. So let's start out with that. So here we have the results of his monohybrid crosses, what he saw. And he was able to see that what he called inheritable factors, again, which we later described as genes, are responsible for all heritable characteristics. So what that means is that everything that you're able to inherit from your parents, you get in the form of genes. And a lot of you are sitting there saying, no, duh, that's pretty obvious. But to Mendel, it wasn't obvious. Mendel was the first one to lay the groundwork that allows us to kind of, again, take that idea for granted. He was the one that said all that information comes from genes. It doesn't come from anywhere else. Okay, so there's one thing that we were able to establish from Mendel's work, the fact that everything we get from previous generations comes to us in the form of genes. All right? Two vocab words here. Our phenotype, what we physically look like, is based on genotype. All right, so what that means is what you see when you look in the mirror, or this very handsome fellow you see when you're watching this video, comes from my genetics. Okay, so what I look like is based on the genes I got from my mother and from my father. Okay, so again, our phenotype, our physical characteristics, is based on what we look like. What we look like is based on our genes or what we were given from previous generations. All right, and each trait is based on two genes. We get one from our mother and one from our father. So that was something that we've talked about a bunch in class, and especially when we finished up the last unit talking about meiosis and understanding that the point of meiosis was to produce sex cells. All right, so we get one trait from mom and one trait from dad. And then we're left with these two genes. And somehow we have to figure out which set of instructions or which allele we're going to listen to. All right, and that's what we get to here. True breeding individuals are homozygous. All right, both alleles are the same. And we'll see when we go through Mendel's laws here one at a time why that becomes important. So, again, those are some of the results that Mendel came up with from his monohybrid crosses. And again, a lot of it is stuff that we take for granted. So let's check out Mendel's laws. Mendel's first law is the law of dominance. Okay, and that's what you guys worked on last week in those worksheets that you guys checked out. All right, and they were both worksheets based on the idea of complete dominance, where one allele completely dominated the other allele. All right, so that's what we got going down here. So we have an across of parents that are purebred for contrasting traits, meaning one's purebred for, I don't know, let's say blue eyes, and the other one's purebred for, let's say, brown eyes. Only one form of the trait will appear in the next generation. So again, there's two sets of instructions there, but only one trait shows up. All right, so all the offspring will be heterozygous, and they will express only one dominant trait. Okay, so again, going back to our Punnett squares at the bottom of our screen here, we see that, let's play with the pen thing here for a second. Let's try that out. Let's go with blue. We see that RR and small r yields small r, capital R, or a heterozygous individual. But that heterozygous individual has round seeds. It's the dominant trait. So one trait dominates over the other. So Mendel was the first one to see this appreciate this and kind of publish it and write it down. So he saw that one trait dominated over another. So again, what we're trying to figure out is we have one set of instructions from mom and one set of instructions from dad. And which set of instructions do we listen to? Well, Mendel hypothesized that one of those sets of instructions were dominant over the other one. And that was the one that we listened to, and thus we got Mendel's law of dominance. All right, so let's see. I guess I got to click done here to get rid of our pen. All right, so and it says here in across for parents that are pure for contrasting traits. All right, so again, here's our brown eyes and our blue eyes down here on the bottom. All of our individuals are going to be heterozygous. All right, and again, only one trait shows up. All the offspring will express only the dominant trait. That's his law of dominance, and this is just kind of re-emphasizing that point. All right, so again, just one more time to kind of drive the point home here. Let me pull up my pens again. Let's go with red, new toys. All right, so we can see the genotypes up here. All right, so here's homozygous dominant, capital Y, capital Y. Here is homozygous recessive, small y, small y. And here is our hybrids, or our heterozygous traits here. All right, so capital Y gets us yellow. That's the dominant trait. In this case, capital Y, small y, or in the case of our hybrids or our heterozygous individuals, this dominant trait, capital Y, dominates over the small y, and we get a yellow P. Same thing here. Capital Y dominates over small y, and we get a yellow P. If we bump over the green P's, we are homozygous recessive. So there's no capital Y to dominate. So what shows up is the recessive green trait. So the three different genotypes only yield two phenotypes. The dominant trait here makes this one yellow. The dominant trait here makes this one yellow. Same with this one. Dominant trait makes this one yellow. There's no dominant trait here at all, so our recessive trait is free to show up, and that's our green P. Okay, so yeah, hopefully those slides help you guys get a little bit of idea of Mendel's law of dominance. And I know we take this stuff for granted. I've said it a couple of times, but Mendel didn't, because Mendel was the first one to notice these things. So let's check out some more of Mendel's different laws. Mendel also came up with what we call the law of segregation. So what that said was, during the formation of gametes, sperm cells or egg cells, think back to meiosis, that two alleles responsible for a trait separate from one another. So the mechanism, the thing that made Mendel's law of segregation happen, was meiosis, what we learned about in the previous section. So this is kind of him restating, again, from a totally different standpoint, because he didn't know about meiosis. He didn't know about cells. He called it the law of segregation. But really what he's describing, what we now know, this is meiosis. Okay? We made gametes. And if you think back to meiosis, the point was to make gametes. Okay? Or sex cells. All right? And the two alleles responsible for traits separate from each other. So that's what we saw in that biological process. All right, so alleles for a trait are then recombined at fertilization, producing a genotype for the traits of the offspring. So again, think back to meiosis. We created sperm cells and spermatogenesis, and egg cells and eugenesis, and then at fertilization, we came back. Okay, and now we have two sets of instructions. We went from one-end gametes or haploid gametes to a diploid, all right, cell. So that was our zygote. That was a result of fertilization. Again, that had two sets of instructions, one from mom and one from dad. So this is Mendel kind of hypothesizing that meiosis has to kind of happen, even though he didn't know about meiosis. So that's the idea of the law of segregation. So again, let's check out a little bit about that. Again, if you think back to meiosis, this kind of makes sense. So here's our female parent, and at the end, we can separate. Again, we're going from diploid to haploid. And here we have our different gametes. Here's our male parent over here. Again, we see our different gametes. And then that brings us to what we've been doing. We've been checking out Punnett squares. So these are all the possible genetic combinations. Get a pen here. Let's go blue again. These are the possible genetic combinations. Let's try my handwriting out. 2, 3, 4. All right, so if we check out our different gametes, the point of the Punnett square is to show us all the possible combinations that are out there. And we see that we in fact have 3 different combinations, okay, or 3 different genotypes. We can be homozygous dominant in this case, homozygous recessive, or we can be heterozygous or a hybrid. All right, so that's what we're seeing in here's our traits separating, because again, he didn't know about meiosis. He didn't know we actually made 4 gametes. He just hypothesized that they separated. So again, he didn't know that stuff. So it's not quite what we learned, but this is what Mendel hypothesized, and he was actually pretty accurate. All right, and the outcome in terms of genetics ended up being the same. So let's get rid of my pencil here, and let's move on. All right. He also came up with the law of independent assortment. And what that basically means is that the alleles aren't connected together. All right, so alleles for different traits can be distributed independently of one another. Again, let's stick with simple examples. Just because you have brown eyes does not mean you have to have brown hair. They're independent genes that can be independently assorted. Okay, just because you have let's see, what's another one? Earlobes that are attached doesn't mean that you have to be able to wrinkle your nose. Okay, those are independently assorted traits. So the genes aren't connected to each other. Just because you get one, you don't have to get the other one. All right, so if you're thinking about McDonald's, man, just because you get the chicken nuggets here doesn't mean you have to get the French fries. All right, they're independently assorted. So that's what we got going down here. All right, so he says alleles for different traits are distributed to sex cells and their offspring independently of one another. And this law can be illustrated using dihybrid crosses. We're not really going to cover dihybrid crosses in class, but here's just let's stop there. All right, so those are Mendel's laws. We have the law of independent assortment, we have the law of segregation, and the law of dominance. Okay, so again, these were things that Mendel put out that was way ahead of Mendel's time, when he didn't know nearly as much cell biology as we know, and they turned out to be pretty accurate, and they provide the basis for genetics. Okay, we've learned more. There's more to eye color. Eye color is actually a polygenetic trait. There's multiple genes involved, but he laid the groundwork for us to start examining genetics, and he provided a very solid footer for us. If you want to think about building a house, man, this is the stuff that our house is built on. So those were Mendel's laws. If you have any questions, please email me. Let me know if you're really not sure. We can set up a Zoom and talk. Again, my office hours from 8 to 10, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And we can straighten you guys out if we need to. So again, these are Mendel's laws. I hope that helped. And hopefully I'll be talking to you guys soon. Have a good day.